Good afternoon. Welcome to Women in Ministry TV. Today, we will be discussing family history and giving some pointers on family history. But before we get into the discussion, I'd like to open with a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for another day, a productive day, especially in the area of family history. We were able to have a meeting today in my mother's hometown. And I realize how fortunate we have been to have a mother who shared family history with us and have been able to enlighten us about our past. So, again, I say thank you, Heavenly Father, for our ancestors and for them passing down information pertaining to the family and their habits, their culture, their health, their lifestyle. So, I just want to say thank you. And I'd like to share some of that information, and I'd like for others to share with us so that we can share with our younger generation information about our ancestors from a personal perspective. So, Father God, again, I say thank you. Another thing that I like to do when we having these sessions is and I'm going to wait till the end to do it today, is that I like to do a devotion, but I'm not going to do it at the beginning of the day. I'm going to get started because there's a lot I'd like to share uh, with you all this evening concerning a family history. And those that will be reviewing the broadcast later, I hope that you are able to glean some information about family history. And if you perform the duty as historian in your family, maybe there are some pointers that you will receive today that will help you in documenting your family history. So, with that, I always like to start with the Bible because that is the source. Uh, that is the source. So, as growing up and children, we had a Bible, always had a Bible in the home. And the thing that attracted me most was that at that time, most of the Bibles had at the very beginning of the Bible a genealogy section in the Bible, and where we were trained to write down the birth, the death, the marriage of various family members. And many of the Bibles today uh, do not have that genealogy section right at the beginning. But that was one thing that was common when I was growing up. And that was one of the tasks that we were assigned to do as children, was to update the genealogy section in the Bible. As you read the Bible, there it talks about who beget who was the daughter or son of whoever. And so you had a ability to go back and trace various characters in the Bible, uh, their lineage, their family lineage. In addition to that, in the book of Numbers was where the assignment of census started, where they had to count members of each household. So, and I'm going to turn to the book of Numbers just to give you an idea of how detailed this was. So, if you want to get your Bible and go with me to the book of Numbers, and we can look at how detailed this information was. And I'm going to start with the summary, and it talks about it and I'm using, by the way, uh, the New King James Version of the Bible, and it has a summary. And in this summary, it talks about uh, the numbering of the Israelites, and And then it talks about where they lived. Um, they talked about they were living in the plains, and then it goes on to talk about um, the numbering, the numbering itself, the key numbers that they was wondering. And then in the focus, if you look at chapters 1 through 5, it gives you a reference to the preparation for the census and how to take the numbers. It talks about the old generation. So there's a lot of information that can be gleaned about um, the census and the requirement to take census, and that was in biblical days, as you could say. And then as you go through the various chapters, you're going to learn more uh, in terms of their travels. You know, they were in the wilderness. They talks about um, the routes they had taken. As I said, if we go into details, there are some specifics in terms of how the the book of Numbers is outlined to give you an idea about the family, and it names the families. Like this is the family of Aaron, and then it talks about um, the census, the various census. Um, it talks about the Levites. So I'm not going to go into the detail because that's not the purpose of today. The purpose is to show you that the requirement for the census goes back to biblical days, and also the identification of families. And so this is like a prelude to family history here from the biblical standpoint. Says you can go in here and trace family lineages. Uh, then also with this, as we move throughout the Bible, you're going to see. Let me back up for a moment. Genesis has a lot of information about family lineage also, but I wanted to get back to the census because that is how a lot of things today are determined by who was recorded in what census. And you know, in the United States, the census is taken once every decade uh, to document members of each household. So, if, for instance, um, this the census was first taken in 1790 in the U.S., so that if a person was born before 1790, it may not have been documented in a census. You would have to use other sources. However, even with the census, it wasn't mandatory for birth certificates until about between 1915 and 1920 ish is when the U.S. started requiring birth certificates, and around that same time, death certificates. But those are some documents that has a lot of family history information. So if they're properly completed and timely, we also found that a lot of the responsibility for recording birth certificates rest with midwives. And in a number of cases, the midwives did not file them in a timely manner. So then we have to go back and do reconstructed birth certificates. So the recording of birth is very important. And the parents or the grandparents played a large role in that process in the past. Sometimes older siblings played a role and other relatives. So the birth was a key event and the recording thereof. So when we start talking about the emphasis that's placed on uh, baby showers, that's recording, there's some record of that birth in that family. So if you have a Bible, I would like for you to check it to see if your particular Bible has a genealogy section in the front of it. If it does not, you can generate one yourself and attach it in there so that family members would have key information on the birth dates of various family members and death dates or marriage. Sometimes in the older version of the Bibles, they had a place for marriage and birth and death. I noticed that in the more modern versions, we don't see that as much. So that was like a centralized place for family members to look to get information that may have been retained by very few. So if you uh, get a chance, go to a library and look for an old Bible just to see the difference in the more modern Bibles that have been published. Now, in this room, I just have a more modern one, and it does not have the genealogy section in it. But I have an older one uh, in another room that has that genealogy section, and it was updated with my siblings. So if I forgot my sibling's birth date, I could always go to the family Bible and review that. So, and then you may want to ask, where is grandma's Bible or where is mother's Bible? Because the older generation maintained those and updated those. So that's just one thing I wanted to talk about with the Bible and how it enabled people to keep track of descendants. Now, what are some of the things that we can get from the history and the documents? As I said, we got the census, we got birth certificate in the more modern day. We have the knowledge of grandparents. One of the things that we were taught is that the way a lot of people measured or monitor, that's not what the word I want to use, tracked, I should say, track the birthdays, is that my grandmother, when they told us my grandmother age, they said, well, she was born 6 years after uh, Emancipation Proclamation. So that she was born 6 years after slavery. So they have an event that they relate the birth to. And in a lot of countries, you'll find that people assign names to individuals or a portion of names by the events that occurred or some circumstances occurring around birth. Uh, and this is quite common. So, in other words, uh, I'm trying to think of one right offhand that I could tell you as an example. I remember my nephew was born, and a South African friend named him, and she named him around the circumstances of his mother giving birth. It wasn't the time, but she named him around that circumstances. And in essence, she named him that he was a gift. But in the process of being a gift, because she had a difficult labor, she said, you know, it was a gift who gave the mother trouble in getting here. So that's one of the things that happens is that circumstances around birth or some give some clues, especially in the naming of children. And that may give you some insight. But the key thing is the identification of family members through the generations. The other thing that ways that you can do this, also there's an old church in my hometown. They had a ledger where they recorded the birth of church members, children, marriages, and also death. So at one time, the church was keeping a record of birth and death and marriages. So you may be fortunate if you from a place where the church had a system in place to track additions uh, to the church family. Now, another place you could track information on birth is our school records. And I know a lot of these get filed in the dungeons and places. However, many people have digitalized a lot of information so you can go back and find information. I was looking for information uh, on my great great grandmother, and I found her name. I don't know if it was her, but I found her name on the Indian removal document from North Carolina. So some of the federal agencies have uh, may have names of family members. So when you know a little bit of information, you may know more about where to go to look for additional information in terms of family history. Just talking with the elders themselves, you'll be amazed at how much information elders, not necessarily your family members. I remember mentioning to you that we had a family member who knew my family before I was born. So she had information about family members that had not been passed down to me by my immediate family members. Because when you have that type of intimacy and close relationship with neighbors and friends, information is shared. So, and a lot of elders have good retention memory and they can share some insight. As a matter of fact, the person that I'm referring to, she transitioned 2 years ago, but her memory was still sharp. And she would share information about not only family members, but others associated with the family. So then you can start to build a history based on firsthand knowledge from elders. And then if you have older siblings have information and older cousins. I also rely on an older cousin who is 93 years old, but with a very sharp memory. So when I need information, she is my point of contact, and I'm able to cross-reference that to some other document. So it's good when you have you communicate with the elders, especially those that are still sharp, and it helps them keep their mind active, that they are needed and they can provide knowledge to the younger generation. Another thing with the elderly, they may not be up on uh, electronics, and but they have a system where they record names, addresses, telephone numbers, and if you give them a few moments, they can get you the information and get help you get clarity on relationships. Likewise with in-laws, because when a person married, a lot of time it's the marrying of the family. So one family member may have detailed information about uh, the family that they married into or that one of their family members married. And that was the case with one of my cousins who uh, was trying to identify uh, her father people. And it happened to another one of my cousins. My mother knew the family, and she was able to direct my cousin to his grandfather. So there are reasons why communication is very important. And the elderly have knowledge. They have knowledge from memory, firsthand knowledge of things that occurred during their lifetime, and they may not get recorded. So it's important that the younger generation have those conversations and record that information to pass down to the younger generation. Now, a lot of people are doing DNA, and that is okay, and that provides some answers, but it's not always straightforward because trying to get through the layers becomes very difficult, and people don't know where to start. So if you have a baseline, you can get better response when you have DNA analysis in terms of those matches. And I know this firsthand. I was particularly interested in DNA of my mother. So in 2007, while she was yet alive, I had her DNA tested. And within that test, there are over 2,000 matches. The problem was that many of the matches did not have any historical information about their ancestors that lived during the time of my mother's age. So they were looking for information. And then on several occasions, we have connected, and we have not positive identified that one person or those two people that caused the relationship. Because with DNA, the mtDNA goes back to time immemorial. The mother passes it on to children. However, I learned that they can give it to sons, but sons cannot pass that mtDNA on to their children, only the female. So in my mother's particular instance, she had daughters, but none of her daughters gave birth to daughters. However, she had sisters, and those sisters gave birth to girls, and some of them gave birth to girls. And so, therefore, we have that continuity in mtDNA. So, it's important that we stay connected with the maternal side so that if we have a breakdown in the structure, as in my family, we can go to our cousins and get that mtDNA that establishes that connection. So there's a lot of learning in the process of DNA and a special mtDNA matches. And then you have the Y for the male. Now that becomes a little more complicated, but it still can be done through additional tests. And so as we begin to study more about the nature of human uh, genes, we see that um, there was a system that God created, and I call it the divine navigator assignment because it is through God's design that we exist, and to find out who you related to is not so important as to understanding that we are all God's creatures, and there are more than likely some bloodlines that are identical, not maybe 100%, but enough to show there is a connection that we may never be able to finitely pinpoint because of a number of things. Migration is one. There are migrations. So when I did my mother's migration on her DNA, it covers 21 countries. So when you get down to the details, you can pinpoint, and I'll make contact with a number of people who were close related. And some we have been able to pinpoint the relationships, but we already knew in a lot of instances what those relationships were because there was a close knit family who kept in contact. Now, sometimes um, we may have lost contact with one or two, but as we go back into the generations to find out who were your great grandparents, then we can establish those connections. So And another point is my mother, uh, I knew her. I knew her sisters, and I got pictures of her sisters, but I don't have pictures of her brothers. So we are looking to make contact with my grandmother's brothers and their descendants. And why is that important? Well, there have been two instances in the last 3 years that made me more interested in my mother brother's lineage, because if you all remember the mass shooting in Buffalo, New York, there was a person with the last name Massey that was killed in that. And then just recently in Illinois, there's Sonia Massey who was killed. So I don't know that she's a relative, but it's a strong possibility she could be. So we just don't know. Not that it's so terribly important, but we could reach out to the family that's left behind if we knew that those were one of my grandmother's great nieces or nephews. So it's just kind of interesting point when you know a little bit about your family lineage, and if you hear the name, you get that. Could that be? Could that be my cousin? And if so, you would like to reach out, letting people know that you have some other relatives that you can draw upon in a time of a loss like that. So, okay, I know I've been going on and on. So let's see. I would like to see if we could post some comments. Um, I'm trying to figure that out. I'm learning. So I would like to, um, I'm going to try and do this. I'm not the sharpest on doing this, but I'm going to see if I could go and maybe see if there are any comments that we can have some interaction here on this topic of family history. So just bear with me. I'm going back. Um, so if you can post a comment, um, all right. Well, that's something I'm going to have to work on to get more proficient in posting comments so that we can have some interaction. That's one of the things I truly want to be able to do for the future. Have some interaction uh, based on a number of projects that's coming up with family history. Um, well, I won't delay you, but let's go see if we can chat. I'm going to post and see if it comes through. Would someone let me know? I'm just going to put a quick question. I just did a post. I want to see if that came through. If it did, if you would respond to it, I would appreciate it. I should be able to see the response if it come through. So I don't see any response. So let's just continue then. I'm going to I'll work on that for next week so that I can become more proficient in dealing with the software so that we can become interactive. Now, one of the reasons why knowledge of family history is important for more than one reason. For a health perspective, it is very important because there are some things that are uh, inherited. And another reason, just by having the name, there are some rights that you may be some entitlements. So there, um, not only that, my mother always taught us that when it comes down to having intimate relationship, it was important to know who your family were because there are some rules that are set, and you can see those in the book of Leviticus about marrying and having intimacy relationship with family members. So there are a number of reasons from a spiritual standpoint that it's important to know who your family members are so that uh, you can, one, uh, maybe avoid some of those known sins that we are instructed not to engage in, and two, uh, recognize some of the potential health issues that could be passed down through generation. And not that you can prevent certain things, but at least you may have an opportunity to uh, properly treat them if the condition is known in advance. So, family history is important, as I said, for a number of reasons, especially not just physical health, but also mental health. A lot of people don't want to talk about that, but the stresses that certain family members undergo may be passed down also to other generations. So we have good reasons to know our family, to know the history, and to share it to help improve the lifestyle, the family overall, help improve the lifestyle of the entire family and the quality of life. So we must, it's great if we would share because sometimes there is, say, there's an allergy that may have occurred, and it may have been something that genetically has been passed down. So we can't uh, um, cast off the importance of knowing more about family history in terms of improving overall quality. And I say that from this perspective. When you have that knowledge, you have a chance to improve the longevity in the family and the health. For instance, there's longevity on my maternal side. And because there were different ones living past the age of 70, passing down knowledge, that knowledge equates to improved quality of life in a number of instances. We can directly trace that. So that's what I'm saying. Having that family history, the knowledge, uh, it can help the quality of life of the entire family. And that is what I have experienced uh, in my family. At one of the things that when we were growing up, my mother always shared with us that her great grandmother lived to be 112 at least. She said because when she was 12 years old, her great grandmother was 112. Her mother, which is my grandmother, I knew her and she died when I was about 14 years old. Excuse me. Even though she had a medical condition, she lived to be 90 years old in fairly good health, but she had diabetes. But she, excuse me, did treatments and was able to have a quality of life still. So she was not bedridden, maybe a month or two before she transitioned, but other than that, she was active and strong. So, and likewise, her youngest sister lived with my mother, and she lived to be 80 years old or more. And then one of my grandmother's sisters lived to be 102, I believe. Um, she was alive when I left to go to Africa, so she was still active. As a matter of fact, I think it was on her 100th birthday, she was up dancing. And then, so I'm just saying, once you have that and you pass down that knowledge, the entire family can prosper from um, shared information. Uh, and there are others. I was just quoting some. Uh, the men did not live as long that as I recall. I think the oldest one that I remember living was an uncle who lived to be in his 90s. So, so it is important that when family has knowledge and passes it down, you can see the results of that in subsequent generations. Not only in terms of um, their physical life, you can see it in their spiritual life as well. Because if the grandparents were spiritual and had a reverence for God, that gets passed down too. And so you can see that also in the quality of lives that people live. Now, family history is important, and you can get it through many different ways. Just conversations. Conversations. I remember overhearing a conversation my mother had with a photographer. I mean, uh, not a photographer, with a reporter from the newspaper on her 99th birthday. The newspaper reporter asked her a question like, Miss Beal, what do you contribute your long life to? She says to the reporter, uh, I live like my parents taught me, and I raise my children the same way. So I thought, wow, you know, here she is saying that, she is contributing her success in life to her parents in terms of her quality of life. So this is what I'm saying. We have to pass on the quality of life that we are taught. And if parents are no longer available to teach that, or grandparents, documenting that in a history, documenting that in a film or in a book or in a pamphlet, but documenting that history about our ancestors and sharing it can improve the overall family quality of life. So that's one of the things that I just want to share, that if you had an opportunity to uh, interview families and you see that those families are successful or vice versa, you have to sometimes look at what kind of quality of life did they experience growing up. So if you can do that, or if you can interject and have an impact to change that, we can change what is happening with the family life in our country, in our community. So we can start with our own family, sharing knowledge about family history, uh, sharing knowledge about the way of life, and having gatherings where you take 5 or 10 minutes just to share a bit on family history is important. At family reunions, if you have organized family reunions, make sure you have an event that targets sharing the family history. If you have a family gathering, be it a small family gathering or a large, just make sure you honor someone and share some tidbits about the family. So that way it can be passed down to younger generation and those that have not yet been born if it's documented. So, but basically, when we look at this, and I'm going to close out here in a minute, but if we just take personally, and I'm going to ask you to do this with me if you have a pen and paper, and I would want to come back and revisit this at another session. If we could just take a paper and put a chart. I'm going to put a chart together. I want you to do this with me. It's that how many know their third great grandparents? Any of them? How many know their second great grandparents or great great grandparents? How many know their great grandparents' names? How many know their grandparents' names? How many know their parents' name? How many know their parents' siblings' name? So you can see as we start doing this, we have some sources for family history from those that are still alive and from those that have tales that have been passed down through those various lineage. And in addition to your parents' siblings, then if your parents' sibling gave birth to children and they have memories, so you have a source, you have a great source to start writing your own family history, to collecting and writing your own family history. That is basically what I did in writing my mother's history. Luella Campbell Beal, a force to reckon with. Uh, Being her primary caregiver, I spent a lot of time with her in her latter years. So I started to write some of the conversations. At that time, I did not know how impactful that would be later on. And within the last 3 months, I have learned that what she shared has impact. And we are now in the process trying to make a cemetery in her hometown to place it on a historical record site because we are finding more and more information and people want to know more information. So as we are uncovering information of those that are buried there, we are finding all kinds of key information and points that we want to share with the world, not just with our immediate family, but with the world, because with migration, people have traveled to different parts. But if this is on the historic register and advertised, more people will be able to close some of the gaps in their family history research. And that is what my desire is, to help those who are having difficulty in researching their family history to close some of the gaps by knowing where their ancestors are buried and a little more information about their lives during the time they lived in that area. So that's um, that's kind of where I am on family history and from a you reunited families and restoring family values. Because as I grew up, my mother taught us to honor the dead by taking care of their final resting place, the cemetery. So, with that, I'm going to say thank you all for listening. And if you want more information about the project, it's called the Travel Rest Cemetery Preservation Project. And I can be reached at uh, ML Consulting LLC at gmail.com and um, Travel Rest. Uh, I can't be reached, but Casita Journey, who is also working this project, you can reach her, and that is a Travel Rest Church Cemetery Facebook page if I'm not mistaken. But next week I'll get all of that information and post it so those interested will have that. So again, and before we close out, I'd like to do a closing um, um, prayer, and this prayer is going to be more geared towards what we are facing in these times, and that's partially we um, we have to stay humble. With all of this, we have to stay humble. Sometimes we get filled with pride, and we can't be effectively used by the Holy Spirit. So we have to stay humble. We have to thank God because it is He that has made us and not we ourselves. And that our ancestors suffered and went through a lot in order to, one, keep us alive and keep us healthy and keep us educated, etc. So we did not do it on our own. We stand on the shoulders of our ancestors, and we we need to recognize that. So whenever I see uh, a cemetery that's left unattended and is overgrown, it's saying that we are not honoring our ancestors. So I I I pray that if you know where your parents or grandparents are buried, go by, and if it's not being maintained, just clean a little bit or ask for help, because we uh, we owe that to our ancestors, is to visit their graves or to maintain them in such a way there's a level of the spirit knows. Okay, just let's say the spirit of the event. Let's just take care of our ancestors. um, you may not be able to go every month or every year, but at least make it an effort, or pay someone to go and clean them. But at least take some interest in where our ancestors have been interred in this country. Thank you. And so, with that, I'm going to say good evening. And again, Mary Beal at ML Beal Consultant, LLC, at gmail.com if you'd like to reach out. Have a blessed evening.